Curiosity Highway. This is part 2 of Darwood Smith, professionally known as Darwood Kaye, Waldo from the Arrow Gang Little Rascals series. In today's video we're going to be interviewing Darwood's son David about his father's life from becoming a child star to an Adventist minister. So I hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a good one. And here's his book his son wrote called Finding Waldo. Okay, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what your name is, and what your connection is to the Arrow Gang, or some people know as the Little Rascals.
Okay. Hi, I'm David Smith, and I am the second son of four boys. I'm the second son of Darwood Kaye Smith. And Darwood Kaye Smith, his Hollywood name was Darwood Kaye. He played the role of Waldo in the Our Gang comedy series. Some people call it the Little Rascals. So I am the son of Waldo in Our Gang, and anybody who knows these episodes knows that Waldo was the resident nerd. Smooth-faced kid, always wearing a necktie, always prissy, always had his hair combed. He's the only kid who could spell things right. Everybody else had all the S's backward. And so he was the resident nerd and the geek, and was hired to play that role in Our Gang, and he did that for 3 years.
And he was kind of the smart kid of the group.
He was definitely the smart kid of the group. They turned to him if they needed anything written out, if they wanted something spelled right, if they needed a contract. Waldo could do that for them.
And how did your father get into the business?
My mom and my grandma and grandpa lived in Colorado, but they went on a trip, just a road trip to Southern California, checked out Hollywood, kind of were enamored of it. And my grandma just had the idea, maybe I could be a Hollywood mom. I got my little son here. He's a cute little guy. And son of a gun, it just worked out. She just hustled. They walked the streets. They passed out 8x10 glossies. And somehow my dad began to get these little, he was a 6-year-old kid, began to get these little bit parts, little extra jobs. And then just one day they had a casting call for Waldo. And because he had a little bit of a Hollywood resume by then, he went in and they got that part.
And how many years did your father play?
He was in for about 3 years, and the lucky thing is, Waldo, Dad, he was in Our Gang right during what I would say is the heyday. They had 22 years of Our Gang programming, and he was right toward the end. They had silent movies, and then about 1932, 33, 35, they began to do the talkies. And the lucky thing for Waldo, my dad, was he was in the gang right during the heyday when some of the top people were there. And I always give 4 names, Spanky, Waldo, Darla, Buckwheat. And they were the superstars. They were really good. And somehow my dad, even though he was a bit player, he was shoulder to shoulder with Buckwheat and Alfalfa and those guys. In fact, I'll tell you real quick, it was a running gag on Our Gang that Alfalfa and Waldo were always fighting for Darla. They were always competing who was going to get Darla as the girlfriend in that particular episode. And most of the time, it was Alfalfa. There was one episode where the scriptwriters gave her to my dad, and he rode off with her into the sunset. But I can tell you just very quietly, I can tell you this, in real life, my daddy and Waldo, they were a little bit of an item. They had a little bit of a romantic thing going. Now, they were 8 years old. But Darla and my dad, they were kind of childhood sweethearts way back 1,000,000 years ago. That's a true story.
Oh, that's so cool. And I mean, Our Gang basically started in like 1922, was it?
I think it was about 1922. Hal Roach had this vision of just normal kids doing normal things, crazy things, obviously, but just kids being kids, not artificial, not even really scripted very much, just doing funny neighborhood stuff. And it was not Our Gang in terms of violence or crime. It was just kids having a good time and a little bit of mischief and a little bit of persecuting all of the adults around them, but just innocent kids having fun and try to have camera crews just catching it. and they just did that brilliantly, and it took America by storm. It was really a lot of fun.
What did your dad think of the dog? He was Petey, right?
I don't remember my dad ever talking to me about Pete the dog.
Okay.
The only thing I can tell you is that the Pete the dog, this is a true story, Pete the dog got more pay per episode than a lot of the kids did. I think my dad held his own, but Pete the dog was a very well paid performer back in that era. And of course, even the kids, they were making more money per day than the parents were. And Pete the dog was a very lucrative performer way back when.
Did your dad ever make any real money off of that, or? Because I know a lot of child stars, I mean, they don't really get the money till they turn 21. Was that in your dad's case? Or?
The money was okay. I have a number in my head. I think he got $8.11 a day, or it might have been $11.08. It was one of those two numbers.
Yeah.
And my parents, my grandparents took the $11 and gave my dad the 8 cents, or something like that. But when it was going well, it was actually decent money. I think when my dad quit, this was after our gang, he was still doing some Hollywood stuff. I think he topped out at about $250 a week, which $1,000 a month back in 1943 was a lot of money. So when my dad walked away from Hollywood, it was good money. Now again, my dad was an extra. He was a bit player, and obviously Buckwheat and Alfalfa and Darla, they were making a lot more. But it was not bad pay. The only thing I can say is when my dad was all done with it, I think his parents, my grandma and grandpa, they were able to go buy a house partly using that money.
Yeah.
But as far as adult life and residuals and were we rich? No, we were very ordinary people. My dad didn't have any Hollywood money carrying on into my life, that's for sure.
How many episodes did he do of the shorts?
I can tell you that. I can't list them, but my dad was in 22 shows.
Okay.
There's a count on that. He was in 22 episodes.
And the last one was Waldo's Last Stand, from what I remember.
Waldo's Last Stand was Dad's last. Excuse me.
Sure.
Waldo's Last Stand was Dad's last episode, and I'm embarrassed to say this on two levels. It was a real stinker for two reasons. First of all, it was a terrifically corny script. I mean, just really bad script. And the other thing was, it was right when Dad and Alfalfa and Darla and Spanky, they were all about 11, and they were just older than they should be. They tended to kind of kick kids out when they turned 10. So you had these cute, but not very cute anymore, our gangers, and Dad was 11 years old, 10 years old, Alfalfa. And so his last script there was just a lousy script, and all these kids who had really outgrown the miracle of it. If I was going to brag about one particular episode, it would be one called 3 Men in a Tub.
Yeah, that was a like that
real
one.
Cute story, and of course I have to like it because in that one, Dad is really the star. Unfortunately, Darla ends up with Alfalfa in that particular show, but Dad delivers a long Shakespearean kind of a speech that's kind of cute. And there's a boat race in Toluca Lake, and it's just a real good episode, and Dad's kind of the star of that one.
And once that ended, I mean, your dad basically knew that his time on the Our Gang shorts were ending?
Well, when you got to be 10, you pretty well knew that your days were numbered. Not that they were going to fire you, but just when you got to be 10 or 11, somebody 6 is going to come along. I mean, my dad, I think my dad was 7 or 8 when he got in. Yeah. And Darla was 3. I mean, they picked her up, and she was a precocious cutie. And she was in for 7, 8 years. But when you got to be 10, or for sure if you got to be 11, you could just hear the unemployment office knocking on the door. So my dad got to be, 10 or 11, and they kind of said, when this Waldo's Last Stand is taped, thank you very much and have a good life. And that was the end of it.
Yeah, from what I read, I mean, the shorts ran for like 22 years, and there was, I don't know if I have the exact number, but there was like 175 cast members in total over those 22 years.
That sounds about right, so maybe 175.
Your dad, like you said, really got in at the height of the show.
Perfect time. He was really into the heyday of the franchise. It was a good time to be there.
And once that ended, what other projects did your father do?
When our gang ended, there was really nothing else big. Everything else was teeny tiny, just, throwaway things, walking across the set. I don't think there was hardly even any speaking roles, just little stuff. The one thing I can brag about, well, sort of, my dad was an extra, true story, my dad was an extra in Gone with the Wind.
Oh, wow.
Which is filmed, I think, in 1939.
Yeah.
And the way he got into that, one of the moms on our gang was Hattie McDaniel, and she African American lady, and she played I think she played Buckwheat's mom. One funny thing about our gang, they didn't try at all to have continuity, so one kid might have three different mothers in three different shows. But Buckwheat, Hattie McDaniel played Buckwheat's mom in a few Our Gang episodes, and then when Gone with the Wind came along, they wanted her to play the main slave character in it. She got an Oscar for that. And so a lot of the gang kids are just people hanging around. They all got hired as extras. But I got to tell you that my dad, even though he was an extra in Gone with the Wind, I've watched the movie real careful like 3 times. I've not spotted him yet. So if he was in a crowd scene, but he definitely was an extra there and got $5 or whatever they paid. So that's my bragging thing. My dad was in Gone with the Wind along with Scarlett O'Hara.
Wow, that's something.
Yeah, kind of fun.
I mean, you also worked with like Barbara Stanwyck from what I read, and Lucille Ball.
I forgot about that. Let me talk about that. One of my dad's closing moments was in a musical called Best Foot Forward.
Okay.
And he was about 15. That's right when he kind of quit Hollywood, kind of his last thing.
Yeah.
But he played a little role in a movie called Best Foot Forward, which is a really good musical. Okay. Lucille Ball was in it, and it was a Harry James, the great trumpeter, musical. So the whole story is built around a military academy dance, where Lucille Ball is kind of a ringer coming in. And there's actually a little romantic moment where she, even though my dad is maybe 4 inches yet shorter than she is, they have a little walking from here to here, arm in arm kind of a thing. And I have a picture of my dad kind of arm in arm with Lucille Ball walking down the runway or whatever it is. And so that's really the claim to fame, that dad had a little cinema moment with Lucille Ball. And his character name was Killer. And there's a thing of him playing the tuba, just comically overmatched with this tuba. And again, the killer is tongue-in-cheek. His dad was still a nerdy, kind of a nebbish-looking guy, and so to call him Killer was very much so over the top. But that was kind of his fun final movie moment, to be in with Lucille Ball.
Yeah, that's something.
Yeah, fun.
Did your father ever stay in contact with any of the cast members?
There was very little of that for a couple of reasons. First of all, my dad just kind of went into a completely different field, becoming a preacher and then going to do mission work. But when he came back to the States in about 1970, there were just a few moments. There were some Laurel and Hardy reunion events, and I know my dad went to 1 or 2 of those, and there were some of the old cast members there. In fact, we have a picture where Dad and Spanky are standing in a row of guys. And that was a real proud moment for Dad to be able to be kind of shoulder to shoulder with Spanky again after so many years had gone by.
Yeah, because you look online and there's old pictures of some of our gang members with Laurel and Hardy, like on their lap, another one like publicity shots, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of that out there. But my dad's connection there was kind of minimal, simply because a lot of people moved on. And this is like 1970, 75, no internet yet. And so there just wasn't a whole lot of that. I will say that for a little brief while there, my dad had a fair number of fan mail and stuff, and he would mail out 8x10 glossies from the Our Gang days to autograph seekers. There was a little bit of that, but not much.
If I'd known about that, I would have tried to get one.
Yeah.
Did your dad ever was in the service?
When my dad left Hollywood in 1944, he went to finished high school, started college.
Okay.
I think my dad spent 2 years in the Army, but fortunately it was in between any time of conflict. He was over in Korea, but I think it was either just before or just after the Korean War. And so he was strictly there during peacetime operations. So he was in the military, but nothing volatile.
And after that, I mean, your father obviously went to college, got married, but your dad got into something else. What did he do?
Well, Dad went to Hollywood High School, which is right down the street from our gang and all that. But somehow he found himself pulled into a Christian life about halfway through high school. So he went to a Christian college nearby in Riverside, right near where I live now, and married a real nice Christian young lady. And he decided to become a minister of the gospel, which is just kind of weird compared to, Hollywood. And even in the our gang day, Hollywood was a decadent place. And there was boozing and sleeping around and just a lot of problems, like there always is. But somehow Dad got away from that, became a Christian pastor. And then the kicker is that somehow he and my mom, they were newly married, they got a call to go be mission workers. And so Waldo of our gang, Dad, and I was a little 2-year-old, we ended up out in the boonies of northern Thailand. In fact, so long ago, boonie-wise, they called it Siam back then. And when my dad got the call, literally did not know where Thailand was. And now today we all know. But I had to go look on a map and go, oh my gosh, it's clear around the other side of the world. But true story, my mom and dad was a former Hollywood little child star, ended up being a missionary on the dirt roads of Thailand for 13 years.
Wow.
And just did a world of good out there. And so I've always said, if you face a fork of the road like that and can work with God's blessing and protection, it's not a bad thing to do. And we had a ball. It was a terrific life. The thing that's interesting to me is that my dad just never bragged or talked about or boasted about or tried to cash in on the Hollywood thing. In fact, I think I was probably 10 or 11 before I had an idea that he had done it. I never even heard about it until I got to be a little bit older. And then I began to see, okay, and then he would say, yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
But it was not a thing that he boasted about. I think he felt like God had taken him to a more exciting, better role in life. And he embraced that, and we just didn't look back a lot.
A much better life, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was.
You didn't go the way like a lot of the
Well, they talk
people
about
in Hollywood go.
They talk about the R gang curse, but even beyond that, just Hollywood has always been and always will be, and that's all right. Hollywood has always been a place where tough things happen, and some people are cynical, and some people's lives are cut short. And you had some people in the R gang franchise who got into drugs, got into just awful alcoholism, and here the whole time that was going on, my dad was out in Thailand helping rescue young people from prostitution and crime and giving them a new start. And so I've always felt like God had a nice hand over my dad's life and gave him something really good.
How did your parents meet?
They were both at La Sierra College down here in Riverside, and I think they just kind of noticed each other. It's interesting that they did, because my mom was from a real conservative Christian pedigreed background, and my dad, although he was a Christian, he was definitely from the Hollywood side of the railroad tracks, kind of new to it, kind of on the Hollywood side of things. But despite the fact that they had pretty different backgrounds, somehow they found each other, and he talked her into walking to the church with him and getting married.
Wow. Okay. You got your dad was a pastor, missionary. Is there anything he did for fun with the family? Any hobbies that he liked to do, or?
I can tell you about hobbies with my dad, and I'll tell you why. Mom and Dad really wanted to have a daughter. Well, okay, my older brother was born, then I was born, then they tried again, and my younger brother was born, and they were about to quit. And my dad finally said to my mom, he says, give me one more try. He says, I guarantee we'll have a daughter on the 4th try. And she didn't believe him at all. He finally said, honey, I swear on the Bible. Okay, well, 4th little kid came along, my brother Donald. And so they went 0 for 4. Anyway, the reason I say that is, So we were four very sporting-minded guys. So mom and dad and four boys. And so our whole life in Thailand was tennis and swimming and basketball and water skiing and badminton and ping pong. It was sports, sports, sports all the time. And Dad was a pretty good tennis player and a truly terrible golfer. But back in the 60s, you could go out to Pattaya Beach in southern Thailand, and you could rent a ski boat and a driver and skis and the gas and the whole 9 yards for $5 an hour. And so we had a lot of fun water skiing in Thailand. So you ask me if mission life is hard, it ain't hard at all. It's tennis and basketball and a lot of water skiing.
Very enjoyable.
And we had a nice time. But as far as did Dad have a hobby, his hobby would be sports with his boys.
Yeah. He had a very rewarding career, didn't he?
It was very nice.
And okay, up to the 2002. I mean, your dad still lived in Riverside, and unfortunately, your dad passed away. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? What happened?
Yeah, Mom and Dad were so happy retired in Riverside, which is just nearby. My older brother Dan was a pretty influential pastor in the Riverside area, so they enjoyed hanging around with him and hearing him preach and just being around his life of ministry. It got to be 2002, Mom and Dad were retired, and I still remember we had a lovely Mother's Day party. I think it was May 11 or 12 of 2002, and I had a good time together. That was a Sunday, obviously, Mother's Day. And 3 days later, we got a real urgent phone call saying, get over here quick. Dad's been in a hit and run accident. Wow. So we jumped in a car. We were over in Thousand Oaks, about an hour away.
Yeah.
And we about 2 hours away. And so we jumped in a car real quick and sped through LA and got to Riverside Community Hospital to the ICU. But he was hit real bad in a hit and run. Some guy in a pickup truck just went up on the sidewalk. We don't know why, drugs maybe. Went up on the sidewalk and just pounded him and drove off and didn't get caught, didn't get pulled over, nothing. And Dad was hit real bad, and he lingered in the ICU for about 12 hours. But the impact was just too bad, and he died about 8:40 that night. So that was a real tough thing to deal with. And we thought of other Our Gang people who had violent ends, and this kind of was. But on the other hand, it was a tough, tragic end after 72 years of real good service to the community and working for others, an unselfish life. And so all things considered, as I weigh all that happened, I can look back and say we feel like God gave our family and Dad a wonderful life, despite the jarring end of it. He lived to be 72 and did a lot of good in the world.
And your whole family, like your father, I mean, the rest of you followed to be a pastor, didn't you?
Well, I have my three brothers. They all are pastors. I'm not a pastor. I teach math at the local community college here, San Bernardino Valley College. Go Wolverines. But I spent a long time, about 20 years. I was a writer for Christian radio. So I guess the DNA of a pastor is in all of our blood. So I've done some of that too. But we're all very grateful for the heritage of spiritual contributions that Waldo made during those Bangkok years.
And you wrote a book about your father.
I did. I'll always feel bad that I didn't think to do this when he was living. But a few years after he passed away, I just began to think about this colorful story. And even though he was just a bit player, it still is not a small thing to be working with buckwheat and alfalfa and darla and Spanky. And so I said, can I just do enough internet research? And there were a lot of other anthologies around. There's a lot of DVDs around. Can I get enough info here and just kind of compile it and write it up? And I feel like God helped me to do that. And I got a lot of material from Leonard Maltin, who is a film critic, and he wrote a book about Our Gang. So I got a lot of details and just quotes and pithy stuff. And so I spent about 6 months really cranking it out. And so this book is called Finding Waldo, which of course is playing off of Where's Waldo? And there's this classic, wonderful photo, which I'm sure you can show, that shows Darla in the middle, and Alfalfa and Dad sitting on two sides of her. And she's got one arm around each of them. And of course, like I have mentioned, in real life, Darla was madly in love with my dad. And so when you see that picture, I hope you will keep that in mind. Even though she has an arm around both guys, Dad was always her favorite. But so I had a good time writing that, and it was a fun project for me.
So your off-screen, your dad, Darla's favorite was kind of Dad, and then on-screen it was Alfalfa?
On screen, unfortunately, the script writers usually had Darla riding off into the sunset with Alfalfa because he was the star. But in real life, when they turned off the cameras and the lights, Darla and my dad were just a little romantic tingle between the two of them. And again, bear in mind, they were 8 years old, so I don't think it was a big Hollywood scandal. But Darla and my dad were a little bit boyfriend and girlfriend, sweetie pie, way back when.
Oh, that's cute. How sweet. Well, thank you, David. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure,
I really
too.
appreciate it.
My pleasure, thank you.
And can you find the book, Finding Waldo?
It's a Pacific Press publication, but it's on the internet. Amazon has more copies than I wish they did.
Okay.
They're definitely available. And just go to Amazon, Finding Waldo, and it's a fun story.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Thanks.
You think your boat is so good, we'll challenge you to race tomorrow for the championship of Toluca Lake.
Alfalfa's just trying to act smart, Waldo. He hasn't even got a boat.
Yes, he is. Your bias for you.
Well, tell Alfalfa I'm not interested in his surprise.
And if you enjoyed this video today, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.